Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on a webinar. My name is Taylor Danko, and I am the Product Marketing Manager here at HR for Health. And I have the absolute privilege of helping support this webinar today, which is why don't my employees do what I want them to do? And I'm excited to hear everything that Sharyn has to share with us in her experience. And we took all of your questions today and we put them into perspective and we're adding them into the presentation as well. So if any point you do have questions throughout this webinar, please feel free and comfortable to send them in the chat in case you forget them later on. You can send them at any time and we'll review them at the end. And if we don't have a chance to follow up with you directly, we can get to you after, since we have all of your emails as well. And so you can respond back to us with any of those questions that you might have. And the last housekeeping thing is we will send you a copy of the presentation once we're done today, so you don't have to frantically write notes. We will send you a recording of this webinar as well, and we have some other giveaways that will come with it. So without further ado, I'm really, really excited for this presentation today, and I think you all are going to love it. So I'm going to hand this over to Sharyn and allow her to introduce herself and explain why she's so passionate about this. So go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Sharyn Weiss, and I'm the founder of Weiss Practice Enhancement. I am a practice management consultant. I've been working with dentists for almost 30 years as a practice consultant. And one of the things I became fascinated with early on in my consulting career is this topic of motivation. How do people get motivated? Why do it seem like so many patients and employees are not motivated either to do the treatment or to do what you want them to do? So that began a whole process of me studying the research about motivational theory and translating it into the practice so that we can start beginning following what the research tells us to do in terms of motivating people. So if you are currently having issues with your team, and it's manifesting by your level of frustration because your perception is your employees are not very motivated to do what you want them to do. And perhaps you've begun or have had consistent conversations with them, but it still doesn't move the needle. And you would love to stop threatening, pleading, or even bribing your employees to simply do their job, then you are in the right place. We are going to San Francisco together. Ultimately, I suspect what you want, your overall goal, is a practice culture where employees want to do what you want them to do. In other words, they find meaning and inspiration and energy in doing what you want them to do for the practice, and they feel good about their contribution. So this kind of practice culture would be ideal, obviously. So the question is, how do you get there? Well, we're going to look at the hows, and we're going to specifically look at 4 aspects of what you can do differently. We're going to begin with the diagnostic process. This should be very comfortable for all of you clinicians because we're going to start off with this term you know so well. We have to look at why is there a performance gap? Why aren't they doing what we want them to do? Because as you know, as a clinician, you can't really deliver treatment unless you've diagnosed correctly. The second thing we'll talk about is how to change your conversation with your employees so you're having what we're going to call commitment conversations that are very, very clear on what you want, why you want it, and what the result should look like. But then we're also going to talk about what could go wrong. You may have had a commitment conversation and nevertheless, the employee behavior really hasn't changed. So we're going to explore something that I call the victim villain mindset, which is a mindset that is more blame oriented, where the employee really doesn't want to take responsibility for why something didn't happen. And finally, we're going to end with something that I'm going to call the CPR approach, where you're going to have 3 distinct types of conversations to change employee behavior. Okay, so because this is a webinar on motivation, we're going to use an incentive to inspire you to stay to the end of tonight's seminar. I will provide you with an implementation guide that summarizes some of the action steps we're going to talk about tonight. And HR for Health will also give you a goodie that we'll reveal at the end of the webinar, simply because you stayed to the end and you engaged in one more thing, because learning should not be passive. You should have received a bingo game that looks something like this. If you haven't, then I believe Taylor will put the link to this in the chat. The
Yes.
bingo game is just a tool for you to take notes. And one interesting thing about taking notes is that it increases your learning by about 19%. So simply the kinesthetic act of making learning your own will increase your own memory for doing something. And by the way, I'm going to link that little factoid to all of you complaining about the fact that your employees don't follow your carefully written protocols. And I will give you a suggestion on how to possibly change that dynamic. All right, so as I mentioned, I'm really into research. Sometimes the research is fairly amusing and just reinforces what we probably all intuitively understand. And so the University of Rotterdam, their management department, decided to do a study to see, is it true that one bad Apple employee can affect an entire team's performance? And if so, to what degree? So at this study, they designated 3 types of employees that can negatively affect a team. The slackers, who do the minimal work. You probably have some of those because I saw that in your responses to me. The pessimists, you might call this person the negative Nancy on your team. They always find something wrong, a reason why something can't be done. They just bring everyone down into a pit of depression. And the third type of employee they wanted to test out was what they called the jerks, meaning these are the people who tend to insult others, put them down, or demean them in some way. Now, I've also added this 4th category. This is my adding. The university did not study this kind of employee, but I thought it was important just to make a note because I think they exist in every practice, in fact, in every group of people. And these are the people who will always say, I was a victim of circumstance. I couldn't do what you asked me to do because all these things got in the way, and therefore it cannot be done. Okay, so the university created teams of presumably nice, normal people, and then inserted an actor to play these personas. And then they looked at what happened to the team performance. And sadly, what happened was that they measured a drop in team performance, meaning their success in completing some tasks, by 30 to 40%. So let's consider that. That is a one-time event. And if in your practice you have some employees that you might think of as a bad apple, think about what this is doing to your practice over time if this happened in just one event. What they discovered was that the people in the group communicated less with each other when one of these bad actors was inserted. In fact, some of the team members started to hoard information, meaning they deliberately did not share important information and data with each other. The third thing that happened, no surprise, was that there was a lot more arguing But the fourth thing they observed, to me, is the most notable and frankly scary. And this was that the team members started to imitate and mimic the actor who was doing the bad apple behavior. And so what we can see from this just little study is that we really can't allow poor behavior or interfering behavior on the team. You as a practice leader cannot allow it to continue unless you want this kind of result. And I'm pretty sure if you're here tonight, you do not want that result. So what do you do? Well, the first task for you is to diagnose what is happening. Why is there a performance gap in my practice? And I want you to note that I'm phrasing it like this, because although that study was pretty amusing in the way they characterized employees as slackers or jerks or so on, those are sort of denigrating personality terms. And first of all, you will never be successful at changing an employee's personality. You really cannot do that, nor can you really change their attitude. What you need to focus on is behavior. And that is what we're going to look at for the rest of the evening. So, in other words, why isn't my employee doing what I want them to do? I have a desired goal over here, and this is what the employee is doing, and there is this middle gap. So let's break this diagnostic task for you into simple categories. And basically, there's going to be two categories of reasons why there might be a performance gap. There might be reasons related to the employee that they're not doing what you want them to do, or it might be due to something in the practice environment, or even your own leadership. Now, I put this word "or" here, but the truth is there could be a performance gap because there are reasons related to the employee and reasons related external to the employee. So that is a possibility. But let's look at how would you diagnose if it's an employee related issue. Okay, well, there are basically three possible reasons your employee isn't doing what you want them to do. One, it could be they simply don't have the skill set to do it or the knowledge to do it. So presumably they want to do what you want them to do. They just don't know how or what. This is a competency issue, and competency issues can be resolved, hopefully, through training and coaching and mentoring. But there could be a third reason they're not doing what you want them to do. And that because they simply don't want to do what you want them to do. It's a motivation or commitment issue. Now, you might be asking yourself, this sounds great, Sharyn, but how do I know? Is it skills, knowledge, or motivation? Okay, well, let's tackle the competency issue first. How do you determine if it is a competency issue versus a motivation issue? And there is a really, really simplified question you can ask yourself. So I want you to think about your employee. I want you to think about the task or responsibility that you want them to do. And then ask yourself, if $1 million was riding on it, in other words, that employee could earn a cool million by doing what you want them to do without your oversight to the standards you want. And if in your head you are saying, yes, this employee could do it without my oversight because I've seen them do it, then what you can conclude is this is not a competency issue. This is something else. And it's either going to be a motivation issue or it's going to be issues related to the environment or to your leadership. Okay, so if it's a motivation issue, it could be because they are afraid of doing what you're asking to do it, Maybe it represents something new for them and they're afraid of looking incompetent in front of a patient or their peers, or they just don't want to ever fail at something. That would hold people back because it's a self-worth, self-esteem issue. Or it could be they unconsciously or consciously recognize that if they did this, they would lose some power or influence. For example, I have seen office managers be very hesitant about training their front office colleagues because they perhaps rightly realize that if their front office colleagues could do what they do, they might not have a job anymore, right? So it could be based on a possible real fear. Or it could simply be a style mismatch. This is just so out of the personality of the person, they really can't do it. For example, again, with the front desk, if I find a lot of front desk people have difficulty in holding patients accountable to your broken appointments guidelines. They simply can't do it because they're people pleasers, and it's really hard for them to have a difficult conversation with a patient. Or it could be that they've had a prior bad experience in doing something similar to what you've just asked. And so they're hesitating because, again, they don't want to look incompetent or fail. So there could be some legitimate reasons why they are not motivated to do what you want them to do. At the same time, it could be a reason or set of reasons external to the employee. It could be something in your practice culture or your own leadership, which conflicts with what you are wanting them to do. It could be that the dental software just doesn't do it, or there literally is no time during the day for them to be able to complete what you want them to do. Or you have some sort of reward system, perhaps a bonus system that actually conflicts with what you want them to do. For example, if you've told a front office person, hey, you will get X amount of dollars if you completely fill the hygiene schedule, for example, great. They fill the hygiene schedule, but with totally irrelevant and unproductive things. So this is the way that a reward structure can actually contradict the results you're looking for. But the final three reasons are really important. I have seen dentists give employees one task one day and say, this is an emergency. And then on Wednesday, do a patient complaint. Now there's a new priority. And so the poor front desk or the poor employee is just looking around like, I don't know what I need to be doing. The same thing happens often when a doctor goes to a CE class over the weekend, comes back Monday all fired up by saying, we're going to do X. And then the team know, in about 10 days, the doctor will completely forget about that priority and will be on to something else. So they appear very unmotivated and unenthused by your ideas because you're continually changing direction, or frankly, you don't model the skills and behavior you're requiring from them. This is actually a bigger issue than you might think. But ultimately, you're going to have to ask yourself three questions. These questions will help you to determine, look, is there a reason to continue investing in this employee, or is this just going to never be able to work because it's a poor job fit? So the first question you might ask yourself, is there anything that does inspire and energize this person? Is there any time during your day that this employee seems enthused, wakes up, and really seems to enjoy doing it? If so, then this might be a motivational issue. The second question is, can this person learn and implement? So if it was a competency issue, before you invest additional time training that person, you need to ask yourself, have I seen them change their behavior in the past as a result of new training? In other words, are they coachable? And the third question is, are you willing to change? If it is a leadership or environmental issue, are you willing to change what you're doing and your own leadership in order to get a better result from this employee or your team? And also, can you make that change on your own? So ultimately, if your answer to one or more of these is no, then really what you may be having on your hands is a job fit issue, and it may be time to do what I call emancipating that employee from your practice. Still, what I have noticed doctors inadvertently communicate to their team when they accept bad apple behavior is that they're pretty much saying unconsciously, I need this employee more than they need me, so I'll tolerate almost anything just to keep them here. Now, this is a tough love mirror, because what I'll see many doctors do is justify keeping an employee by telling me, well, it's just so hard to find anyone else. I can't afford to spend time having an opening or looking for someone and starting this whole process all over again. Or there could be other reasons why you're keeping this employee or accepting and tolerating their behavior. Unfortunately, this ultimately will backfire. If this is your mindset, both that employee and the rest of your team realize that they can continue the bad apple behavior because you are going to accept it. And what ultimately happens is that you have paralyzed your practice and yourself from growing. And you will see a lot of indecision and frustration among your team. You will feel it yourself. Ultimately, you're going to create a negative reinforcing cycle, because what everyone understands in the practice is that you, for whatever reason, are afraid to confront the behavior. And that creates a culture that sadly is based on fear of confrontation. And everyone in your team knows it. When I begin working with practices, I interview each employee. It takes hours sometimes based on the staff. And many, many employees will tell me that their doctor is afraid to confront. And they'll generally say he or she is a nice guy, but they won't confront. They are afraid of conflict. And this is not what you want your employees to say about you, because what it says is they, as employees, don't trust that you'll be able to protect them from the bad apple employee, or that you will really focus on the goals of the practice. So this is really not what you want your employees to say about you. What I want you to accept and recognize, and it is tough, is that everything in your practice right now, in fact, in your life, is there because you put it there or because you tolerate it being there. Everything in your practice is there because you put it there or you tolerate it there. Recognizing the truth of this means that you can get out of your own victim mindset and begin to take ownership and responsibility for what is happening or not happening in your practice. And this is an important first step. Ultimately, your role as a leader is to influence the behavior of your employees. And you can do this successfully if you recognize that your employees want to accomplish specific and personal financial and personal goals. They generally want to feel like their work is meaningful, and that they are acknowledged, rewarded, and recognized for their contribution. So you are successful at motivation or influence when you connect the goals of the organization to what each employee really wants in their lives. And by the way, this is also the key to case acceptance. When you connect what a patient wants for their health and their lives to what you're recommending for treatment, that's when patients become inspired to accept treatment. Still, we should look a little bit about what we mean about motivation and how to use it successfully. The traditional belief about motivation is that if we use some sort of carrot and sticks approach, meaning punishment or rewards, we'll be able to effectively change an employee's behavior. Unfortunately, this really isn't true. Carrot and sticks may help train a 2-year-old, but it is not appropriate or effective for a 40-year-old. Its very nature is paternalistic. And one of you wrote that your employees do the good mommy, bad daddy type scenario. And part of this is because what's been happening in your practice, possibly, is this carrot and sticks approach, where one of you is the good cop and the other is the bad cop, and one either doles out rewards, good job, or punishment, I'm going to write you up. This isn't the greatest way to change employee performance. What does work, what 60 years of motivational research has proven, is that intrinsic motivation, meaning my desire to do something to accomplish my own goals, is always going to be more powerful and ultimately sustainable than extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic meaning coming from outside the person. Let's see a funny example of this. So in the 1890s, this ad appeared in a newspaper. And this ad for people to join an Antarctic expedition would violate literally every principle we know about marketing. And yet, this ad drew hundreds of applicants. So let's look at it. It advertises, we want men for a hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful. Now, you would think, who the heck would sign up for this? Why would anybody want to do this unless they were completely desperate? Because the only thing that you'll get as a result, though, is this: honor and recognition in case of success. And in case of success means in case you live. But look at how powerful honor and recognition could be. By saying, if you do this really difficult thing, you're going to come home with a sense of honor and bravery and recognition for what you did. And that is a great example of intrinsic motivation. Well, let's look at 5 other myths that unfortunately we tend to operate under. And the first myth you might find the most surprising and perhaps a bit comforting, because the thing is you really can't motivate people. People motivate themselves. Your employees have walked into your practice motivated for something. What you would be best served to do is figure out, what is that? What is it that they really want in their lives? What makes them light up? What are their own values and goals? Because your role is to help inspire them to do what you want them to do, to become self-motivating. And you would only be able to do that if each employee sees that they can accomplish their own goals by doing what you want them to do in your practice. And you're going to have to be really explicit about what they can gain by doing a good job in your practice. And it's not just about compensation. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, but holding out the hope for more money for people generally doesn't work as a motivational tool for the long term. So here it is. I have now written 4 books about employee compensation, and I'm about to publish my 5th. And the reason is because, unfortunately, we have a lot of misperceptions about the role of money and increased money. What the research shows and what you're probably experiencing is that money by itself is not really an effective motivator. It won't really increase job satisfaction or performance for the long term. And I bet I can prove this to you in 1 second, because I'm going to ask you if right now your employees are making the highest salaries you've ever given any employees. And given what's happened over the last few years in inflation, I'm going to bet that these are the highest compensated employees you've ever had. But if you're here tonight, what you're saying is, I'm paying them really well, but they're still not motivated to do what I want them to do. And that's because money alone doesn't feed people. It doesn't inspire them. It tends to create a temporary sense of self-worth and satisfaction and happiness because of the new buying power and because it connotes a sense of worth. But by itself, money won't change their behavior. And so anyone who ends up bonusing employees as a way to get them to do more or do it with more energy is going to be sadly disappointed. What all the research suggests is that bonuses, which are really bribes in another name, ultimately end up decreasing performance and decreasing motivation. It's very interesting research, and it may align what you've observed. The next myth we touched on this earlier, is that fear is a great motivator. Pointing out the consequences of their behavior in terms of you're going to get a poor performance review or I'm going to fire you, those may be absolutely true, but that alone will not create greater motivation or better performance. What you're going to get is compliance. They're willing to do it when you're watching, but not so much when you're not watching, because the intrinsic motivation is missing. So for all of you who have had cell phone policy violations because your employees are nevertheless looking at their cell phone all during day, what you've gotten is compliance to your policy, but not a commitment to it. We'll talk a little bit about how to change that. But ultimately, throwing fear and consequences at employees is not going to work. This myth is also interesting. Many doctors believe that because the way you learn or because of what's important to you is also going to be what's important to your employee or is going to motivate them. But we have to understand one thing right from the top. If you're the practice leader, you already have an entrepreneurial mindset that your employees do not. You've invested everything in this practice, but your employees, this is perhaps just a job. They might enjoy it, but they can leave. This graphic illustrates this issue. You'll see that there's a plate of bacon and of eggs. And we're going to look at then the contribution of the chicken to the pig. So in this metaphor, the pig is committed while the chicken is interested. And it's a great metaphor for the different levels of investment in your practice. So you need to realize that just because you would do something in that situation doesn't mean your employees would do it. And finally, I don't ever want you to take a demotivated team and say, well, all right, we're going to go to a baseball game and for sure that will cheer them up. because enforced fun are these activities tend to be like a band-aid, and they're just covering over what's really happening in your practice. In addition, when you hold out an incentive that you might enjoy, saying to the team, if you do X, we can all go to Las Vegas for the conference. Well, they might not see that as fun at all. Half your team might have kids or obligations or be afraid to fly. They don't want to do that. So holding out a fun event as a reward might not generate motivation that you want, and in fact might backfire. So let's review what we're learning. First of all, motivation is always internal. I decide if I want to be motivated to do what you want me to do. It is my decision. Punishment and rewards, the carrot and sticks approach, will generate dependency on you because you will always have to be there to deliver the punishment or reward. This is not going to be a self-motivating person. An employee might feel, though, more motivated if what they're doing leads to outcomes they value. Now, that could be, I saw that I organized this and now it's wonderful, or I'm getting patient compliments, or I can see I've relieved someone's pain. Those might be intrinsic motivators. But ultimately, and what I'm going to talk about more is this, that most people value having good relationships with their peers, and most want to have a good reputation. And this is what you're going to use more instead of the carrot and sticks approach. Ultimately, what you want your employees to do is to take accountability for their performance and their behavior. And as an ex-English major about 1 billion years ago, let's note that accountability is composed of 2 words, account and ability, meaning, can I count on you? Do you have the ability to do what? To make a commitment to follow through on this responsibility or task and follow through at the highest standards possible for you. And so this is probably where you want your employees to go and a marker of the kind of culture you want to create. To do that, I'd like you to adjust the conversations you're having with employees to make them literally commitment conversations. And that means in a commitment conversation, there are 2 people. There's you, the requester, and then there's the employee who is going to implement what you request, right? If you're having a commitment conversation, you have to cover at least these 3 main topics. What do I want you to do? Given, and specifically, what do I want you to do? Why do I want you to do this? In fact, why is this important? Why is this necessary for us to get the results we want? Why is this crucial now? And why am I choosing you specifically to do this? And the final thing you'll have to cover in a commitment conversation is, what standards are you using for success? In other words, how will we both tell that you've been able to do this and gotten the right results? So specifically, you would be covering these 5 things in your commitment conversation: what you want, when you want it, and why it's important to do. You would need to describe ideally objective and, if you can, measurable criteria that would tell us both that now you've been successful at this task. The third thing you need to discuss with the employee is what barriers, what obstacles, what could come up in getting in the way of you getting the right result. You will ask the employee for their commitment. And this is important because this is a partnership. It's not necessarily you being a dictator. You're wanting to enroll the employee. And it is quite possible that an employee could have legitimate reasons why they couldn't do what you want them to do. So you need to hear it. And then finally, you're going to go negotiate the process of what will happen when and how you will follow up with that employee, both during the process and after the process. Okay, so I hope you've taken a good look at all of this, because what I want you to do in chat is evaluate this requester's request. What maybe is not so great by the requester saying this? So the request is, if you get a chance, oh employee, could you find a list of unscheduled patients with outstanding treatment? Okay, so in chat, please tell us what is probably not great about this request. So I'll give you a couple of moments to let me know. And Taylor, if you could help read out the chats as they come.
Absolutely. The first response is standards for success not defined.
Excellent, right? So, I mean, find a list. Okay, well, list of what restorative and restorative hygiene, which patients, right? And how would I know I got everything? Because you didn't define really necessarily what patients you want. Or it's hard to know. Is this just a piece of paper I'm supposed to give you? What else? Do we have any other evaluative comments on this one?
Someone sent in, if you get a chance, it doesn't sound prioritized. I'm not sure if I'm following that.
Yes, excellent. Remember when I said one of the things has to be, when is this? So if you get a chance, if I'm your employee, I didn't get a chance all week. So obviously that should be okay with you, right? Because you said when I get a chance. So this kind of phrasing, along with could you get it to me soon, along with could you do this as soon as possible, is too vague, right? Be specific. By the end of today, by 4 o'clock, I would like a list of these kinds of patients with outstanding treatment. Now, have you noticed anything else that's missing from this? Is there any other chat comment, evaluative comment on this one?
Yes, someone added no timeline is provided.
Yep, no timeline. By when? Who knows? It's just whenever you get a chance, oh patient, and employee. And the other problem here is there's no why, right? This is just a task you've assigned to this employee. It's not going to be very motivational because I'll do it. I don't know why I'm doing it. I don't know how it helps anything, but okay. And again, yes, it can't be that important or crucial because it's simply when I get a chance. So this is a great example of where the requester is not being specific enough. Look how this could have been different. What if the doctor says, hey, employee, last month we had a real issue. We've typically losing about $7,000 in production due to our high number of unfilled appointments. Obviously, we can't continue like that. It would mean that we won't be able to afford the new technology we need. We might have to, in fact, put a freeze on raises. Obviously, we need to increase our production and we need to fill these unfilled appointments. I'd like you to head up a reactivation campaign, and I think you'd be great at this because you're detail oriented and have these great communication skills. And here is the big question. You would then turn to them and say, how'd you feel about doing this reactivation project from beginning to end? Now notice how this is an enrollment conversation. I'm going to ask for their commitment, but I'm not dictating it. I have to ask them, are you willing to do it? Assuming they say yes and the conversation continues, you'd be very specific about how you define success. And here's some criteria. They list timelines, measurable results, and the other results that we're looking for. Great. Well, your conversation would also include these questions to your employee. What do you see as the overall process? What would be your first step? When would you be able to work on this? What barriers would you face? What help would you need from me? And I want you to notice a few things. These are all questions. This wasn't the doctor saying to the employee, okay, great. So you're going to follow this checklist that I've created for you and this 4-column Excel spreadsheet where I've listed all your tasks and when you can do it. And the reason this is an asking question process rather than delivering the information on what they should do and when is because if you are asking your employee to manage a process, then you have already observed they have the competency to do it. And so if you are then taking back the decision making on how they achieve it, what you're inadvertently doing is undercutting your employees' competency and their motivation to take ownership of this. So my strong suggestion is not to create a document on how they will accomplish it, is to ask them to tell you how they will accomplish it. And then finally, you can begin to then negotiate also what your role in this process will be. And it should be a negotiation. Yeah. It is possible that that won't have immediate success with every employee. So here are some principles of what you should do in case of failure, meaning they didn't follow through or you didn't get the result you want. And this might seem obvious, but I do need to say it because I've seen too many practice leaders just get frustrated and do the task for the employee. But if you do that, then what you're teaching them is one, you've reinforced that they can't do it by themselves. And you've taught them that if it gets too rough, mommy or daddy will do it for you. And so this is a bit paternalistic. I've never seen a professional sports game where a coach comes from the sidelines and moves the batter out or a pitcher out and says, the heck with it, I'm going to do it, right? That is not your role. So you can, if you've determined it's a competency issue, you can go back and help coach, train, and provide resources, but you can't go back and do it for them. You can ask your employee to suggest solutions like, this didn't get the results that fit the criteria we're looking for. What do you think, employee, you need to do differently to get those results? If the employee really doesn't have a clue and no suggestions, then you have to have a dialogue where they now must accept your coaching and feedback, right? Because they've just said, I have no idea. I don't have the capacity to understand what to do differently. So if you're giving them some suggestions, then they have to accept it. And finally, you would describe the consequences. Now, by this, I don't mean only, hey, if you don't do it, your job's at risk. I also mean the consequences, hey, if we don't get this done, here's the consequences on the practice. Here's the consequences to your colleagues and to the patients. Are those consequences, are you willing to live with that, oh employee? So that's what I mean by consequences. Now, one thing often happens when an employee fails to do what you want them to do is that they portray themselves as a victim of circumstance. And by that, you might hear things like, well, nobody told me I was supposed to do that. Or Well, patients just don't want to accept since we're not on their insurance plan. Or, well, the traffic is always so big to the office. I can't help being late. And often in a victim scenario, there is a villain, right? So the villain could be another employee, you, the insurance, the traffic, could be something. And this is a trap because it's hard to get out of a victim villain mentality. So I'm going to teach you a very quick verbal skill that I want you then to teach to your employees. If you see your employee is getting into a victim mode, meaning I'm powerless to do anything about it, I want you to say these two sentences. I didn't anticipate this, whatever they described as the external barrier. So now I will do Y. These two sentences together get you out of this victim mentality and take more ownership and responsibility. I didn't anticipate that traffic would be so bad in the morning that would lead me to be late every day. So now I will leave 15 minutes earlier, whatever it is. But this sentence, so now I will becomes a commitment they are making to you. And you should make that clear that what they are now doing with you is making a commitment to change their behavior in response to an obstacle or barrier. Now, I love that approach, but still, you may have some entrenched behaviors. And so I'm going to introduce something called the CPR approach. CPR is an acronym for content, pattern, and relationship/reputation. It's going to be a series of 3 conversations you would have with an employee about your disappointment with their performance. I wish I had invented CPR, but it actually came from the people who wrote these 2 books. It's a company called Vital Smarts. They've written a bunch of stuff, very good. The common author is Carrie Patterson. So if you want to look it up on Amazon, go ahead. They have great stuff. A third book I can completely recommend that came up with the statements about I didn't anticipate, so now I will, is this book by Sylvia Molina. All of them are available on Amazon. All right, but let's look at the CPR approach. The first time an employee does not do what you want them to do, and meaning you're disappointed with what's happened, you're going to talk about the content of the situation, right? You're going to describe the situation, exactly what happened, using neutral background. So many of you wrote in that a common issue is that an employee is not following through with your protocols. So it begins with a very neutral statement that's basically saying what you saw or heard or observed. So I've noticed in the past week you haven't been following our protocols. Great. That's what you saw in neutral language. Here, the next part is the impact of that behavior. The impact of not following our protocols has been that operatories aren't ready for the patients and they don't meet our standards for cleanliness or appearance. Okay, then the next thing you need to add to this statement is what you want them to do next, right? Describe the desired behavior. In this case, it might be, I want you to follow our guidelines to exceed OSHA standards for every patient without exception. And then you're asking them very directly if they are willing to be accountable for that result. And in this, it's can I count on you to get that result? Okay, well, let's hope that accomplished it, and you never have to talk to that employee about that again. But in case of a water landing and that didn't move the needle, the next conversation you have is not about the content again. You don't have to describe that again. The issue now is a pattern of broken promises to you. They did not fulfill their commitment. So it begins similar to the last one. We agreed that you would follow our protocol. I'm seeing that you didn't. It hasn't been kept, and I am concerned that this has become a pattern. Now we need to talk about this pattern and why you're doing this over and over. At the end of our conversation, we will create a contract or a commitment about following our guidelines. So notice this is a step up. It's not, I'm going to write you up because you're a bad employee, and then I'm going to put you in the corner where you can think about what you did. That is very paternalistic. We're all adults. What we're saying is we're going to create a contract about you being accountable for getting the results we want. Now, a contract in the business world is often called a performance improvement plan. I believe HR for Health probably has numerous examples of performance improvement plans, but in general, it will include all of these elements. It will say specifically, here's what you're responsible for doing, what I'm responsible for doing. Here's what I want you specifically to do, and here's what I don't want you to do. And there may be objective standards attached to all of that. When do I want this? And again, of course, it's not soon or by next week or whenever. Be specific. You'll agree on when something maybe have to be delivered if that's true. And finally, I have ended performance improvement plans with some acknowledgement that they are now on a disciplinary path. And so that is usually language like failure to comply with this agreement or contract may result in dismissal. And so I usually end that in a performance improvement plan. Okay. So you've now talked to your employee twice. You've created a performance improvement plan, but unfortunately, you're still seeing similar issues. Now you're not talking about the content or the pattern. You are talking about the damage this employee is doing to their relationship with you and their colleagues and their reputation in the practice. And so you can see we talked twice about this, and you now have a pattern of breaking your agreements with me. And you can talk very honestly about the impact that breaking of patterns has on you. In this case, it has affected my level of trust, or it's affected how I don't see you as reliable. This is the leverage you're going to use, that now you have broken the relationship with the their peers and you. So these are possible relationship and reputation consequences that you might want to mention to your employee. When you don't do this, or when you do this, you give everyone or me the impression that you're not someone who can be relied on. So for all of you saying, hey, they're not following my protocols and checklists, imagine saying to them, when I see that you haven't followed our protocol, I interpret that as meaning you are not someone I can rely on. And then you're looking them dead straight in the eye and asking them a question. Is that the result that you want? Or you could point out that they're damaging their peer relationships. So some of you have mentioned punctuality is an issue. They're either coming late or leaving early or doing both. So let's look at the coming late issue. Esmeralda, when you arrive 10 minutes late every day, what it suggests is that you think you're more important than your colleagues, and that your colleagues, it's their responsibility to cover for you when you're not here. Is that your intention when you choose to come here late? Or if they're leaving early, then it might be when you leave early, it suggests that you're not really interested in helping your peers at the end of the day, and you're willing to let them do what you're supposed to be doing. And it also suggests to me that if you can actually leave early with no damage to anyone, that maybe you're not so pivotal to the job. Okay, other consequences is that you've lost my trust, or that ultimately this is going to impact any raise or promotion you might be hoping for. So what does this sound like? At this point, oh, employee, we need to talk honestly about whether you'll be able to gain my trust and if this is the right job fit. And here are two very, very pivotal questions. What do you believe needs to happen at this point? If you're willing for the employee to say something, or you can ask this very direct question. Continuing this behavior is putting your job and your reputation with us in jeopardy. And because this is a webinar on motivation, it's a real direct question. How motivated are you to stay here? And notice that's a pretty big question. So my last question for you is this. Many doctors that I work with would have a real reaction to being so direct and forthright with your employees. So what I want to hear from you right now, we'll just take a minute or so, is what questions do you have about the CPR approach, and how would you apply that possibly in your own practice in responding to a real situation with an employee? So Taylor, if you could tell me, some of the responses as they come in. We're looking at what questions you might have about the CPR approach, or we'll broaden it to anything I've talked about tonight, and how might you apply what we learned?
We haven't had any just yet. We'll give them a few more seconds.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so while we're waiting, Taylor, are there questions that have come in during the webinar that I can answer?
No, looks like you're doing a good job explaining everything.
Okay, all right. So while people hopefully are working, let me go back to the bingo card. If you put notes in all of the boxes on the webinar, on the bingo card, what I'm going to ask you to do is also put bingo in chat. And if you put bingo in chat, you are going to be eligible to get the two fabulous prizes, which I'll remind you are the webinar implementation guide from me, which I will send to you via the chat, or you can just ask me for it by emailing me. And Taylor, maybe you could share the fabulous prize from HR for Health.
Yes, absolutely. So I see some of you sending bingo in the chat, and I'm excited to send you a $25 Amazon gift card. We'll follow up with you once we're finished with today, but thank you for participating and submitting your bingo answers in the chat, and I'm glad you got some use out of the cards.
Okay, so are there any responses or questions that I can answer at this point?
You had some feedback that said this was great, thank you. And then we had some people send in some bingo responses, but other than that, you don't have any questions.
Okay, well, all right, well, that's amazing. But sometimes people are shy to share their real questions or share what's happening in your practice. So here's a side offer. If you have a situation that you are really troubled by and you would like some advice, go ahead, email me. I'm willing to chat with you for a free 20-30-minute call and give you some suggestions. It's my pleasure to do that. Okay, so is there anything else that we can respond to?
No, you got a lot of thank yous. Someone said this was clear, concise, and excellent. Someone said it was amazing, and you got another thank you. So you're doing awesome.
All right, well, wonderful. I obviously always appreciate that kind of feedback. And you can also, give me on the side any feedback about something that wasn't clear or you wish I had done more of or less of. But meanwhile, I see we're a little past time. So again, I want to thank you for spending a Monday evening with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll follow up with you once we have uploaded the recording, and I'll send you the materials with the slide deck, the book, and your gift card if you sent bingo in the chat. And I look forward to hearing from some of you soon. Thank you again, Sharyn.
You're welcome. Sure.
All right. Bye, everyone.